It is not the last word, with its heavy conclusion, the victorious argument, or the unrefuted hypothesis that breaks down the towers of lies and brings forth the truth that encircles reality. It is the open-ended conversation, the slow grinding of language and the symphony of words, time, perhaps, filled with voices, the never-ceasing sounds of speech, the inner dialogue that silence never reaches, and the unfulfilled desire to enclose the all-encompassing totality of being. Still, truth is often taken to be an end. Perhaps the longing is too great to endure. We are like birds without wings, Plato tells us. It is not impossible that this burden is too heavy to bear. We imagine ourselves at the end of inquiry, enlightened and wise. We imagine that we are independent and that one person can carry the weight of truth. Thereby we also turn the longing inside out. According to Plato, this illusion makes our existence tragic. Too eager to get to the point, too ambitious to genuinely collaborate, and too inflated by our own individual importance to listen, we compete and quarrel over what is true and real. We forget about our individual limitations. We overshadow our deep dependencies by narratives of self-sufficiency and the struggle for power. To a large extent, Aristotle shares this point of view with Socrates, as does Plato. But there are some differences that are important, and at the end of the day, it is nevertheless the road that is the goal. So I would like to take a closer look at what they have to say about this, one at a time. Plato offers us two famous images to make this point, a cave and a ship. At the ship, to begin with, all the sailors quarrel with one another about steering, thinking that he should be the captain, although none of them know the art of navigation, and none of them can point to anyone who taught it to him or to a time when he learned it. Plato spells out the consequences in the following way, and I quote, "They don't understand that a true captain must pay attention to the seasons of the year, to the sky, to the stars, and to the winds. And they don't see that a true captain considers it impossible to both learn how to navigate and to get time to practice the art of taking the rudder, whether the others want him to or not." As this goes to show, without truth, disaster is sure to come. Without a layer of leadership devoted to finding out what is true and real, we are lost at sea, and the fate of us all is certain. But the more subtle point Plato is trying to make here is also about the quarrel. Developed to capture the political situation of his time, Plato uses this image to analyze the consequences of what happens in a situation where power and victory is considered more attractive than truth and collaboration. The ontological aspects of this point is made even more explicit in the famous image of the cave, as we have heard a little bit about. But here, Plato makes no distinction between political quarrel and ontological competition. Having ascended from the cavern of illusion and out into the light of truth, the former prisoners are able to reflect on their own life down in the cave. And what they then realize is that everything that they once held to be true and real was a lie. Tied down by hands and feet, they were only able to see the shadows on the wall in front of them cast by a subterranean fire, and about this shadow they quarreled, fought, and competed. The honors and commendations, as Plato puts it, that they once held in high esteem and handed out as prizes are now considered worthless. Just like in our courts, Plato writes, where we fight over shadows of justice, or in politics, where we fight and compete for political influence, so did the prisoners fight over the shadows of illusion. Set free, however, they will realize that truth dwells above the cavern of quarrel. The process to get there is, however, difficult and hard to withstand. At first, when initially exposed to the light of the day, they will be blinded. The brightness of reality will make truth seem unbearable. Not only, we can suppose, because they will need to leave their own life behind, but also because this means that they will need to forsake the competitions and struggles that used to give their life meaning. Immersed in the light of what is often described as immutable forms or disembodied paradigms of beauty, goodness, justice, and the like, they will realize that truth is not a prize to be won, but a step into a shared and overwhelmingly radiant reality. To a large extent, Aristotle shares this point of view. Truth stands above quarrel and competition and corresponds to a shared reality. As is well known, Aristotle is, however, somewhat skeptical of the truth of Plato's so-called forms, but he still seems to consider truth a collaborative affair. To make this point, Aristotle begins with the basics, and he puts it in the following way, and I quote, "To say of what is, that it is not, or of what is not, that it is false. While to say of what is, that it is, and of what is not, that it is not, is true." This may seem simple enough, but Aristotle also shares Plato's idea that truth is blinding, and indeed also a collaborative affair. This is also from the Metaphysics. The investigation of the truth is in one way hard, in another easy. An indication of this is found in the fact that no one is able to attain the truth adequately, while, on the other hand, we do not collectively fail. But everyone says something true about the nature of things, and while individually we contribute little or nothing to the truth, by the union of all, a considerable amount is amassed. Therefore, since the truth seems to be like the proverbial door, which no one can fail to hit, in this respect it must be easy. But the fact that we can have a whole truth and not the particular part we aim at shows the difficulty of it. Perhaps, too, the cause of the present difficulty is not in the facts, but in us. For as the eyes of bats are to the blaze of day, so is the reason in our souls to the things which are by nature most evident of all. So, end of quote. This means two things, at least two things. On the one hand, it means that reality is shared and that it is true. But on the other hand, also that it, for us, is difficult, if at all possible, to grasp. In this sense, Aristotle certainly shares Plato's basic point of view. Even as we stand in its light, immersed and surrounded, our capacity is insufficient, and at least individually, we are inapt to handle the blazing light of day. As you may have noted, however, Aristotle does seem to leave a door open. Collectively, it seems we may have a chance. Even if no individual is able to understand what is true and real, truth and reality can be understood if we put our heads together. As we shall see, Plato shares this point of view, at least to an extent, but there is also an important difference. While Aristotle, so to speak, thinks of our shared efforts as a matter of empirical cherry-picking, as it were, Plato is more inclined to trust what he calls reason. One main difference that is important here, of course, is Aristotle's reliance on observation. As noted, Plato, at least in the image of the cave, shows us that most of our experiences and observations from the lives we live down in the world of shadow and fire are worth little or nothing and can only be properly understood in retrospect once we have emerged from the cave. For Aristotle, on the contrary, our experiences and observations are key, also as it comes to truth. One telling and often quoted passage comes from Aristotle's text on the generations of animals. Here, in a context where he has just launched a theoretical solution to the problem of how bees procreate, he reflects on a theory just put forth and argues that even if his theory might seem to be true, it is not certain until it has been confirmed by observation. So, and I quote, such appears to be the truth about the generations of bees, judging from theory and from what are believed to be the facts about them. The facts, however, have not yet been sufficiently grasped. If they ever are, the credit must be given rather to observation than to theories, and to theories only if what they affirm agrees with the observed fact. Perhaps it was also for these reasons that Aristotle was reluctant to accept what is often called Plato's theory of forms. Not only does Aristotle complain that this theory treats forms as separate entities rather than as the inherent structure of things, he also argues that truth is not to be found in a detached realm, but within the objects themselves. Okay, so as this goes to show, Aristotle and Plato both agrees and disagrees. They both think that truth is out there and that it is available as a shared venture. But unlike Aristotle, Plato does not think that our inquiries into the truth can be inquiries into the accumulated experiences and observations of humankind, into what most people think, or into the realm of reputable and famous opinions, in one word, what Aristotle calls endoxa. But how then does Plato mean that we are supposed to do it? To an important extent, it is impossible to distinguish Plato from Socrates. And one important clue as to how to begin to answer this question we find in the so-called Socratic inquiry. In one sentence, this method or form of conversation is not only about refutation, so as to pop the bubbles of the inflated, self-awarded winners of the competitions for wisdom, although this, of course, is an important part of the task. It is also about understanding how we inquire together, without losing sight of the shared endeavor to be pursued, and without making it all collapse into a struggle for power and influence. There are many passages in Plato that makes this point. In the Protagoras, for example, Socrates insists on keeping to short questions and answers instead of long speeches, because this makes it possible for all parties in the conversation to follow along and thus to be personally invested in what is said. In the Crito, Socrates insists on performing a shared inquiry instead of merely refusing to allow himself to be freed from the prison, because he wants Crito to see the truth of the matter for himself and the injustice of releasing him. In the Charmides, when accused of refuting and making other people feel ashamed, Socrates shows that the effects of the joint inquiry are broad and that they apply to all involved, himself included, in the sense, and I quote, that the truth about existing things are made manifest. In the Gorgias, the difference is spelled out with some clarity. We can either set victory as our goal and strive in all that we say to overwin those that we speak with, or we can investigate the subject matter together. So, to return, I'm just about to finish now. So to return to the ship and to the metaphor of the ship, Socrates says we have to make a choice. Life has a limited time span, and there's not enough time to, quote, both learn how to navigate and get time over to practice the art of taking the rudder. In the first case, we instrumentalize the inquiry. We bend and reconfigure its path to make it seem as if our already established opinions are the most reasonable and persuasive. In the other case, and I quote, "In whatever direction the argument blows us, this is where we must go. Not by using reason to persuade, but by following it. Not by using it to gain power and influence, but by submitting to it and by allowing it to lead the way." Thank you.
Thank you. I have two impossible questions for you, Olof. First is, why were the Greek philosophers so obsessed with truth rather than the meaning of life or the existence of God? And can we learn anything from this?
Well, first of all, I mean, so I don't think that maybe in everyday life everybody was very obsessed with truth. Of course, I mean, both Plato and Aristotle has this very simple idea about truth also in this kind of correspondence sense. But
it occupies a central part of their thinking.
Yeah, it does. It does. It's difficult to say because we do not know. So Plato, for example, as Aristotle, I mean, it's much more about method, say, than about doctrine. I mean, this has been a debate ever since kind of antiquity. Yeah. If we have this skeptical Plato, or if we have this dogmatic Plato, but I think that to say why they are obsessed with truth is rather to say so we must know what they mean. But the answer that we get means that we must understand the methods that they kind of suggest. Okay. So we have to kind of walk the path ourselves, I think, a little bit in order to answer
Second impossible question. If we should rank the importance today of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, who will be first, second, and third?
They do share very much. I mean, I think if there's one thing, so preparing a little bit for this, I was thinking, what do they have in common? And I think one thing that they do have in common that maybe is a bit underemphasized is this emphasis on the shared inquiry of the collaborative nature of truth. And I mean, of course, it may seem that, say, the theory of forms may seem like this individual realization. So it is something that you alone understand, and then you can go out and teach this to the masses, as it were. But that does not seem to be, for any of these thinkers, to be the main point. So all of them seem to emphasize that truth is not something that you can individually experience. It is something that we must do together.
I'm fully satisfied this far. Thank you.
Okay.